Ladies and gents, boys and girls, welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast. My guest on the podcast today is Paul Cartwright, National Account Manager for Aico. Now, Aico are the market leader in fire and carbon monoxide detection. We're going to be talking about the values and ethos behind building safer communities, some of the ways that we do this, and how the industry of fire, smoke alarms, and detection has evolved over the years, in alignment with all the changes in legislation and all the complexities that have come along with it. There's also a really significant aspect to this with regard to corporate social responsibility that I'm hoping you'll find quite insightful. Before we jump in there with Paul, let's hear from our wider podcast family. First up is a massive shout out to our partner, William Wood Watches. Chances are you already know who William Wood Watches is, but if you haven't, you'll have seen them in GQ, The Times, Esquire, Forbes, The Telegraph, BBC, The Financial Times, Men's Health, upcycling firefighting equipment and utilising every single component that makes up the beautiful watches. They've won the Esquire Self-Made Entrepreneur of the Year. They were chosen by GQ Men's Health as the best men's watches to buy in 2020 and 2021. They've donated over 50,000 to international firefighting charities. Now, there's so many ways to go on and find out more about William Wood Watches. Head over to williamwoodwatches.com. Check them out on their Instagram. Check them out on their Facebook. They've got a private group if you are a member, if you have purchased one of their watches. So jump on over, take a look, whether it's the Triumph, the Valiant, the Bronze, the Chivalrous. And they've even got the Tunnel to Towers 911 watches. Honestly, if you are a fan of the emergency services, if you're looking for that gift for someone, whether it's a new recruit, whether it's retiree, get over to williamwoodwatches.com and take a look. I promise you will not regret it. Our second partner of the podcast for today's episode is the incredible Hikes. Hikes footwear is made in Europe and they are an innovative high-tech functional shoe manufacturer, and they meet the highest standards all over the world. They cater for the fire and rescue, the medical, workwear, police, military, forestry, streetwear, from our tactical frontline special forces operators to our firefighters boots on the ground. Hikes are keeping us safe in every single way. As part of their partnership with the podcast, they are giving away a pair of Hikes boots every single month. So after the podcast, be sure to jump over to our social media feeds, have a look for that post, get yourself on there. We have given away 3 pairs so far. We are doing it every single month, so get over there, check it out. There is no funny details to be had, so jump on over, check it out. Hikes UK, a fantastic partner of the podcast. Well, there you have it, folks. That's the names in the frames for today's episode. So without further ado, if you're sitting comfortably, let's buckle up for safety, and I will see you on the other side. Paul Cartwright, welcome to the Firefighters Podcast. How you doing, boss?
Yeah, great. Nice to be here. Nice to talk to you, and obviously see you on screen. I don't know if everybody else knows what you look like.
Unfortunately, no. I mean, that's one point we're going to get to in the future when we're super fandangled technological masters. But at the minute, the visual is purely for mine and your pleasure. So unfortunately, everyone else doesn't get the benefit. But thank you for wearing your birthday suit. It really suits you. You look fantastic.
Yeah, I wish I'd not had a shave this morning now, to be honest. But
yeah, I know. I put my tux on for nothing at all. You joined us today from Aico, and I wanted to have you guys on because sort of community safety is such a massive aspect in so many things that we talk about when we talk about the emergency services and these great companies that work in and around it. Now, you guys are sort of market leaders in this area, I suppose. So to give our sort of listeners an understanding, what is the company all about, and how do you guys deliver value?
Yeah, I mean, we've been operating for in excess of 30 years now. We're actually our 30th anniversary last year, which we, in inverted commas, sort of celebrated during COVID.
God, that must have been terrible.
Yeah. We've got so many plans. We've got a marketing office, marketing storage full of 30th anniversary stuff. What we were basically going to be inviting people down to the office, doing lots of different events, and giving away all this sort of 30th anniversary binders and various other pens and all this sort of stuff. And now we're giving it away in year 31, which a little bit, it's not as good as we wanted it to be. But we did actually have a company event right at the start of the year, year 30. Kevin Keegan came down, talked about sort of inspiration and inspiring people, and he can still kick a football. We were giving away sort of signed footballs, and literally we got a big room with 70 staff in there.
Yeah.
And it was kicking it pinpoint to every single person in that room. There were glasses all over the table, and he was literally just kicking it straight into their hands every single time.
No way. I'll tell you what, you've got to have some confidence to do it. Even when I suppose he approached the company and said, I do this thing when I come and speak, and what I do is, and they were like, yeah, maybe, or maybe not, because like you might start getting glass and everyone's like, no, I'm really good at it. Seriously, I've still got it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing.
He started doing it, and he's like, first person, right, front table, yeah, it's fine, and then he just started going further and further back, and it's like this is going to need carnage, but literally every single one. And he's great, I mean, he talks about inspiration and working, and the success he's had in business, and it's great to hear when you something a little bit different than bringing someone in, sort of talking, trying to inspire you from a different sector. Sometimes can seem a little bit odd, but it very, very so self-deprecating. The companies he's worked for, he listed out three or four companies he'd worked for, really, really, really funny and good, and were great. So we did have that opportunity to celebrate just before sort of COVID hit and everybody went into shutdown. But yeah, digressing, we've been around for sort of 31 years. The company was set up by an individual. He wanted to work in electrical distribution, so he set up his own little business. Effectively fell into a distribution sort of agreement with EI Electronics. They were an advert in the paper, and basically he responded to it. Surprisingly, they gave him the contract. He was effectively working out of his own house with a small lockup, and they gave him sole distribution rights to the UK.
That's amazing.
No contract. Basically, gentleman's agreement. They shook hands, and right, you will get it.
Isn't there?
At any point
just to double click on that, sorry. So we're talking 30 years ago. So we're talking, at the beginning of the 90s, and that really was the time when independent businesses were really being empowered, because you could. I mean, we're not. No one's trying to pull the wool over somebody else's eyes, but you really could stand toe to toe with some of these massive companies and offer and demonstrate yourself to be, a company that really adds value, irrespective of your size. So this was consummate professional who had managed to get himself that sole distribution. That's massive. Wow. Yeah.
I mean, the timing, everything's about timing, I think, sometimes. The company, the EI Electronics, the company themselves, had gone through a massive transition. They've been set up by GE over in Ireland,
oh, really?
50 years ago, to make electronic components, basically to serve the European market. And that's where the EI comes from. It was basically an Emerald Isle project for GE, and that was the sort of gateway for them into Europe. They took a decision to sort of pull out the market, basically move, close the factory down. It gave the management the option to take a management buyout, which they subsequently did with, support to the banks, and the banks sort of trusted them enough to let them sort of run with it. And three guys basically took over the company and kept everybody in employment. I mean, that were a big part of the reason they wanted to do it. They were working there. They were working alongside a huge amount of people. Largest indigenous sort of workforce in the south of Ireland.
Yeah.
And they were all basically going to be made redundant and, look to find another job. So they were allowed to do it.
Yeah,
absolutely. They were making effectively small amounts of Black and Decker at the time. That was the sort of part of the business what were really thrived. And they set up on their own and basically renamed the company EI Electronics. They retained the Emerald Isle sort of principle. Everything comes out with an EI name on it, including in the UK. I mean, they've got sort of businesses throughout Europe, France, Germany, and all of those are called EI. So it's EI France, EI Germany, and then we've got Aico in UK, which is entirely different, but it's synonymous with the name of the brand. We've built the brand through Aico in the UK with by far the most successful part of the business in terms of turnover and everything. But it was timing. I mean, they gave him the agreement. Like I said, there were nothing signed. They could have pulled out at any point when they started getting bigger and said, right, we're just going to deal with. We're going to allow someone else to do it, but that never happened. And basically, the King's Cross fire sort of occurred at the time, and people's perception of fire and the dangers of fire grew massively. The industry grew. We've got some significant competitors at the time coming from abroad, but Ken Ainsworth, who set up the company, that's where the A comes from in Aico, it's Ainsworth Company. He basically, when I came into the business 20 years ago, the business was still sort of, doing well, but, less than £10 million turnover a year. It was, good, reasonable size sort of SME, basically, supplying various products. Smoke alarms were a key part of it, but we're also supplying lighting and various other things into the electrical distribution market. When I came into the business after all the interviews and eventually turned up for the business for the first day, we did a bit of an induction first day and then went to see Ken in his office. We're a very small office, fairly big sort of building, but Ken had got one of the smallest offices in the building anyway. In his opinion, he didn't need a big office. We're in and out of the business. I still remember to this day, that it was basically welcome to the family. You're here now. You're part of the family, and that's what we want to retain. That's what we want to keep in the business. We want to keep a family business. Everybody should know everybody here, and I've not really heard that before in all this time. I'd only been working for 10 years prior to going into that. I'd never heard that before. I'd never spoken to the guy right at the top of the business, basically saying welcome to the family. Every time there's a major tragedy, all of a sudden people decide they want to have smoke alarms again. And it's like, one of the things we talked about, a few weeks ago when we talked about doing this, it's like, what drives the business? What drives the business is basically the idea that you're keeping people safe. What is a smoke alarm to people? Well, a smoke alarm should be something what's on the ceiling, what they never think about, apart from once a month and they're just testing it. But it should never operate. It should just be on the ceiling, doing nothing until that unfortunate day where it does need to do something.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people need reminding about that every now and again. And it tends to be those incidents. We've obviously Grenfell's in everybody's mind still now, but over the years there's been various instances where all of a sudden everybody wants a smoke alarm or everybody wants a carbon monoxide alarm, and our job is basically to prevent that from happening. To have smoke alarms and CO alarms on in people's houses doing the job, and when these things occur, people think, thank God I've got a smoke alarm on my ceiling. If it ever happened to me, I know I'll be safe. I know I'd be a lot safer than if I didn't have one. There are occasions where smoke alarms. You could have a smoke alarm in every room. We've talked about. I've been to events where people have talked about sprinklers, and there was this sort of urban myth about nobody's ever died when there's been a sprinkler in a property, and the sprinkler associations say these things. That's not true.
No, absolutely not.
People will, unfortunately, if they're covered in alcohol and then fall onto a cooker, which is one of the occasions, basically, the sprinkler won't save that person because they're the source of the fire. It's just being as safe as you possibly can be in your home. And if you've got smoke alarms in the risk rooms and in the escape rooms, all the areas of the property where you need to have them in, you're by far increasing your chances of getting out of that.
It's all about that early detection, early awareness, giving yourself, stacking the odds in your favour, effectively. Yeah. We're never going to completely remove human error, but I wanted to take you back just for a second to when, the company first started, I suppose, in the UK, and, we spoke about a couple of key incidents there. When do you think, at somewhere along that timeline, did people's personal accountability start transitioning? Because when I think, back 70s and 80s, when I think about my timeline or the timeline of just the general public, there was a point, and I don't know when it is, you'll know perhaps far better than me, when the transition happened from, well, if there's a fire, we're just going to ring the fire brigade, or if the worst happens, we'll just ring the fire service. And we still do that, of course, but when do you think people really started thinking about taking a bit more personal accountability? It wasn't they had a lack of trust in the emergency services, but they thought, by the time, we all respond within 10 minutes or whatever, but we need a bit more notice than that. It could already be game over within the first 2 or 3 minutes. People have seen the videos and how quickly fire spreads in the home. When do you think that sort of mindset started happening? Because did it align with the growth of the business at all?
I think to some degree it did. I think, like I said, there were a huge growth of the business in the aftermath of the King's Cross fire. And that weren't a domestic fire. No. But it was just the idea of dying in fire. It was in people's consciousness. The idea that, smoke will kill you. People got a lot more information about the effects of smoke. Most people didn't actually burn to death in a fire.
People think you can just cough, and as long as you can get out, you'll be all right. Just don't go anywhere near the fire. But you know what? Most people, and I'm just going to butcher the statistics, but most people don't get anywhere near the fire deaths. It is the smoke that's killed them long before we or anybody else finds a charred body. You know, that they've been gone long before that. When you see the autopsies, it's almost always smoke inhalation.
I think this is it. And I think just people got a lot more information on that. They became aware of it. There were a lot more public information. You know, we don't see the same level of public information. I don't think we see the same level of public information films out in the market that we used to back in the 80s and 90s.
I don't think we do. And also, I think a lot of people are very, very clever about data and how we cut data and how we perceive data. And I think people are led astray by very cleverly worded marketing data. So, yeah, it can give a feeling that things aren't as transparent as they once were.
Yeah, I think you're right. I just remember back to the old days of Charlie and basically telling me how to, cross the road and the Green Cross Code Man and things. And, they're a lot shorter and sharper now. The drinking and driving thing adverts and things. There's certain ones you remember. But I just don't feel like there's as many things out there today. It's led to industry in a lot of respects to sort of promote this. I mean, and the fire and rescue service have been given a big job over the last, I don't want to say 10 years, but it feels like 10 years doing the fire safety checks within properties, which has been a big difference over the last over these years. I think people are more aware because of that, without a doubt. Fire and rescue knocking on your door saying, "Can I just come and do a fire safety check?" and explaining to the people that they should have an escape plan and they should have smoke alarms on the ceilings, albeit, all the fire rescue can do can fit battery smoke alarms. I
think as much as you're sort of giving credit to the fire and rescue service, I actually think they've learned a lot from external companies and things like that, because I think time's gone past, and speaking to a lot of retired members of the fire service, stuff like that, we were heavily focused on that reactive emergency aspect. We were an emergency service, and we didn't necessarily do as much. And in some areas of the UK and globally, we didn't really do any preventative work. We like going into schools and teaching stop, drop, and roll and all that sort of stuff. But there's kind of this concept that when people reached adulthood, it was their responsibility, and it was more difficult, and it always is, to try and give guidance and or advice to an adult. Sometimes they're less receptive, they're not as impressed by the big red fire engines. So it's finding those trigger points and relying on companies such as yourselves to really give that accurate data. And you spoke a lot about safer communities there. I wanted to really just zoom in on that and how the more sort of holistic ways that we look at building safer communities, because you guys do a lot that is indirectly associated with the sector and indirectly associated with the business, but it really is over and above what perhaps people would expect a non-government funded entity to be doing, because you do a lot.
Yeah. I think it's driven from the top. We've got an MD who's very keen on CSR, on social value and community and social relationship. A lot of companies, it is one of those KPIs what companies set themselves, that we need to do more social value. But it's a lot of companies what are not as heavily involved in safety as we are. Banks might be social value plans and various other things. But from our perspective, we're selling a life safety product.
It's nice, isn't it? But it does feel weird when you see companies like that doing it. It's a bit like it looks like they're being forced to do it, or they're just doing it because they think they should do it. There's no real authenticity or correlation to what their mission and their values
I think you're right.
are.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you do look at some of the things where it's there's an article just gone up saying we're just giving £10,000 out of the £10 billion profit we've made this year. We're giving £10,000 to a local charity, and
that's great.
Just feel like just do it, but you don't need to. You don't need to advertise.
Feels weird.
But from 4 years ago now, we had a company conference. With every year we have a company conference and get all the staff, literally the whole team together in a room, and the various things. It turns into it's more of a team building event as opposed to a sort of conference, self-congratulatory sort of thing. We're having a good year again and all this. We don't do any of that. But 4 years ago, we specifically put everyone in, closed the business down, put everyone into a room, and said we need to basically create the values what we want to. All ascribe to, a day to day, every day. Let's just spend a day and let's figure out what the values are, of this company. So, we'll give ourselves a company tagline, but we'll also set some key values. And, we decided upon sort of 6 key values effectively. The idea was basically we put everybody in a room and separated everyone into sort of small groups of 10 people. and like just come up with all the things you want people to do. You want people to be within the business. What do you want to be? What's the best version of yourself doing within the business? Get all these things up, and we should be able to sort of pigeonhole all these things into sort of 6 key values we want to sort of subscribe to. And we spent the whole day doing it. The whole company were involved in doing it. There were no leaders and teams. They were basically everyone sat around the table, just coming up with ideas. And basically, examples being, everyone should be accountable for everything they do. They should show accountability for the 100%. Work that they do. They should be, we should have trust right across the business. All these little things, and then just basically put them into pigeonholes and say, right, these are the values. And one of the key ones, what really, the trust, passion, all these other things, you'd see them across a lot of businesses. Teamwork, accountability, all these things would be across the business. But safer communities was one what sort of just sprung out of nowhere, really, in some respects. We've got trust, we've got passion, we've got accountability, teamwork. Sharing Genius is another one, which it were a name we had to put to it. But the idea is, if don't keep things to yourself.
Yeah.
If
that's a really, really good one. People that hoard information out of fear of being dropped or something like that. It's amazing what you can achieve when you don't mind who gets the credit for it.
And it's such a key part of what we're trying to do as a business. We talk about leadership and the idea of protecting your position. There's a promotion coming up somewhere within the business, and you've got all this information. What will be great when you take to a presentation? What you should be doing is sharing that information. There could be better people within the business who deserve that. Who are better for the business. You may feel you deserve that promotion more than anybody else. You work really hard for the business. You have been there the longest, but are you still the best person for that position? And in a lot of cases, that's probably no.
Yeah.
You might want it for your own personal gain, but that's not the best thing for the business. The right person for that role is the best person for the business. If you're sharing your genius and you're supporting your colleagues, the business will move forward, and in turn, you will see the rewards from business moving forward. That's the silly thing. If you're holding the business back for personal gain, eventually you're going to lose out anyway. Yeah. So, like the sharing genius and the safe communities were two what really weren't in my mindset when we originally were looking at looking at all these values. And once you start hearing all these little things what form part of that sharing the genius and safe communities, you realise, these have got to be our key values. These have got to be things we've got to work on every single day to grow the business. We are a commercial entity, so we are, we do want to sell smoke alarms. But why do we want to sell smoke alarms? Why does all 68 people within the business, why do they get up in the morning? They come into work. We don't want them just coming to work and going home at night and forgetting about the business. We want them thinking about what they're doing every day and what contribution they're making to society. We don't work flexi hours. Basically, it's just people in the business 3/4 an hour early, half an hour early every day, because they want to be at work and they want to be doing something. They want to be up to something. And it's the same at night. There's no clock watching where, a buzzer goes off and all the shares go up and everything. You'll be sat at your desk working on something and look up and realise it's like 5:45. Yeah. But you not know it's time to go because everybody else is still sat at the desk doing something. Or we've got sort of leisure facilities at the office. We've got a gym. We've got a games room and various other things. So people do turn up and go to the gym early before work, or they're staying after work as well. It just removes that sort of clock watching thing altogether. People are just there being part of something. And everybody gets paid at the end of the week, at the end of the month. But it feels like you're doing a lot more than just going to work. But it's how we then start delivering that and, delivering on those promises we're making to one another about getting out into the community. Everything, we've got 2 people within the business whose sole responsibility is CSR. They're not people who've sort of gone outside and said, right, we need a CSR person, we need to put an advert in paper. Basically just people within the business who've been really interested in what we're doing. It's like, Lily worked in sales, Jane worked in accounts, and it's like basically they move through the business into that CSR role. They effectively, that's all they do. Basically talk to schools, talk to charities, talking to businesses and promoting that promoting that principle throughout it, but also helping colleagues do what they want to do within the community. So.
It really is a manifestation of, like we said, about that holistic approach to safety as well. That's a much more holistic approach of people's ability to add value rather than just get your head down and crack on with the work.
Yeah, you can't whip people into sort of submission. I don't think that's probably an H's.
It won't stop a lot of them trying. Some people, they're clinging on hard to the stick, not realizing if they just empower people with that stronger why, which is great to see companies like yourselves doing. I wanted to jump to an aspect that I think people are slightly less familiar with, because you guys are market leaders not only with the smoke alarm and safety aspect of what you do, but also sort of carbon monoxide detection. This is something that the fire service have obviously taken on board, and it's something we try and support people with, providing with detection and stuff like that. But to a lot of people, it's still a new concept. You know, you go into a surprising amount of properties that haven't got smoke or much carbon monoxide detection, but I would argue you go into far more that aren't having carbon monoxide detection. For people totally unfamiliar with this, what are the big dangers and why have we even got them in our homes?
I think you're right. You know, there's definitely, you know, in terms of uptake, people actually going out and buying carbon monoxide or CO detectors, we tend to call them now. It's the smoke alarms are the easy one. You know, people have just been used to it. I think they are used to having them on the ceiling now. You know, the numbers are in the high 90% basically of ownership. You know, or that's the perceived value. That's a perceived number for ownership. I think when you actually look at the fire statistics and the number of smoke alarms present in fires being significantly lower than that, that suggests that, you know, there's a perceived number of smoke alarms on ceilings, but unfortunately, I think a lot of them get taken down. Yeah. Particularly if it's, you know, if they start nuisance beeping or they start beeping, you know, and they're not really up to scratch, people will take them down and get, you know, basically just get a downer on them. I mean, you know, it's changed over the years. You know, it has changed over the years, the technology, you know, the old technology of ionization alarms. You know, they basically smell smoke. If you want to, you know, take it right back to some layman's terms, basically they effectively smell the effects of the fire. So if you can smell bacon cooking, or if you can smell toast, the ionization smoke alarm would as well, and it go off, and that creates. So, you know, people getting upset with the alarms, trying to shut them up all the time, and eventually just take them down. Opticals, the sort of standard, you know, development in those, and as the name suggests, they need to see smoke. So basically, only when you know, if you really burn your toast, you know, you're producing a lot of smoke, then they'll still trigger. Yeah. But not just when you know, making your breakfast in the morning. So if they see smoke, basically they'll go into alarm. So I think people's perception of smoke alarms has grown over the years, and the understanding's grown over the years. I think for CO, there's not as many incidents reported in the news. They don't see CO incidents on the news. They see fire puttering from buildings and things, and, you know, they see it. Whereas for CO incidents, even though they are reported fairly well now and they are recognised, there's not the same perception out in the market. But effectively, any fuel burning appliance can give off carbon monoxide. A lot of appliances are a lot safer nowadays. You do get room sealed boilers and things which are much safer than they used to be. But there's still potential for them to produce carbon monoxide. One of those things where basically with a fire, you may well be the best detector in your house for a fire. You may not have. You may have got smoke alarms upstairs, downstairs, on the landing, or where you might have got one in your living room, you might have got a heat alarm in your kitchen. Unless you work for a smoke alarm company or you're a fireman, you've probably not decided to fit smoke alarms in your bedrooms as well, because, you know, it's the sort of last place you tend to start looking. A fire starts in your bedroom with your door shut, you're probably going to smell that smoke alarm, that fire before the smoke alarm in your hallway goes off. Yeah. If you've got a boiler in your bedroom and it starts giving out CO, you won't know about it. Your CO alarm will tell you that there's a problem, but you'll never know. You'll basically just not wake up. CO affects you that way, basically makes you drowsy. It's muscle relaxant, and
a lot of people struggle unknowingly as well, don't they, with long-term exposure to things like carbon monoxide, headaches, like you say, lethargy, and just constant, almost subduedness that is about people that suffer from it, and they've no idea.
No. For years and years, I mean, my own experience in that, you know, I had an auntie, you know, they got a lot of electric heating in the house, which were very expensive. So they bring in a portable gas heater into the house and, you know, basically buy the bottles from the local caravan site and keep filling that up and keep using that. And, and I used to stay there a lot, and I used to sleep a lot. I used to fall asleep on the sofa there a lot. It's nice and cozy, it gives off a lot of heat. So you just think, it's cozy in here. This is why I fall asleep. The window's streaming with condensation, because this buildup of carbon monoxide basically in the air because it's not circulating. You're not getting the air circulation in the property. And I think a lot more people. We still don't test enough people for carbon monoxide poisoning. There were a time where basically every death, every unexplained death would get a test for carbon monoxide poisoning. So, a lot of people are put down to old age or hypothermia or various things, they basically dying in their own houses. Yeah. I think there's a lot more cases of CO poisoning than we care to believe. But as you say, not everyone who gets CO poisoning dies from CO. No. There's a lot of people suffering from long-term exposure to levels of CO what they're not aware of. And it does have a negative effect on your body. It's affecting your nerves, it's affecting your heart, potentially your heart valves. There's a lot of things what could be happening, what you don't have. And similarly for smokers, smokers are injecting CO into their body, every time they take a cigarette. As it happens, it probably, their body's probably better served at dealing with a CO incident because they're constantly being exposed to it than people aren't. But it's obviously having a detrimental effect on your body, having that CO. The levels of CO, and I think the other thing is people don't necessarily understand how CO alarms work as well. No. A smoke alarm sees a level of smoke and it goes into alarm and lets you know there's potentially a fire or whatever it might be what's triggering it. If the CO alarm goes off, it's going off because you're at danger from CO. Yeah. It's not going off because it's sensing CO. There's different levels within a CO alarm. So it's a low level
exposure, isn't it? Yeah.
That's it. But at a low level, basically the alarm will go into effectively pre-alarm, so you'll get a little flash on it. Once it's sensed that level for between 60 and 90 minutes, then it'll sound and tell you, because you've been exposed for a low level for an amount of time what's now becoming dangerous. There's a sort of mid-level where it'll go off sort of 10 to 15 minutes because you've been exposed to a higher level for a period of time, again, when it's become dangerous. If you get a particularly high level of CO, then it'll respond straight away.
Does a lot of this come from sort of the working time, sorry to interrupt you, working time sort of regulations? Because a little bit like working in very cold environments or working around certain chemicals, you can have almost microdoses that don't have there's no tangible studied long-term negative effect necessarily on you. But as long as and I forget the terminology that they use in the legislation, it's something like, it's called like a short-term activity or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, that is level of time.
Yeah, that can be 15, 20, 25 minutes. But anything less than that, we're considered to be able to take a certain dose. And like you say, it's not necessarily going to be long exposure, but that's when our first stage alarm sort of kicks in.
That's it. That's basically it. So you'll get the flash on the alarm telling you that there's CO in the air. But until it actually becomes dangerous, it won't go into alarm. And we get a lot of calls from, we deal with virtually every social housing provider in the UK with our alarms. Not the same proportion of them fit CO alarms in every property, and that's something we are working on with them to encourage more of that.
Why? Is it just a cost aspect, do you think? Or?
It's a cost. Yeah, it's a cost. Unfortunately, with most safety equipment, this applies to everything really in terms of legislation as well, and or deciding upon what should be done with legislation. There's a cost associated.
Isn't it kind of a reverse thinking though? Just to pause there for a minute, because, and I'm not necessarily going to advocate one or the other instead of, but it's like we've all got fire alarms, or we've all got the idea of the smoke alarm. We're not trying to argue the fact for that anymore. People get it, so it's like a lot of housing association and stuff just agree with that, and they'll carte blanche put them in intrinsically safe, wired and everything like that. But it's pretty obvious when you have a fire. It's really obvious. It's kind of a binary, 0 or 1. You either have one or you don't have one. But if you start to argue the case for a carbon monoxide alarm, they'd be like, oh, well, if we get an incident, then we'll maybe consider putting there. You might have an incident now. And it's so, because they either don't get reported very well or there's exposure levels that people aren't aware of, people, you walk into homes, people wouldn't know if they were getting exposed to carbon monoxide.
No.
They'd just be like, I just feel drowsy. Or like you said about elderly population who tend to use their heating more, they will just write it off and go, oh, but Janice is 70. Old Graham down the road, he's just getting on a bit. He's always been a bit like that. And you're like, well, maybe not. Maybe if you took him, and he lived in so-and-so's house that just doesn't run off any of that sort of heating, they would immediately perk up.
Yeah.
It's hard to justify it for some people. And I get there's a cost aspect to it, but I don't know how to navigate that one. And I'm sure it's a daily frustration in the company.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of sort of thought process. I mean, we're constantly sort of questioning the reasons why there's not a law in place what basically says everyone should have.
It would make it a lot easier if people just made it legislation, wouldn't they? And I know we're going to get onto legislation, but sorry, I interrupted you.
No, absolutely. And like I said, we can talk about that further. But in terms of when a social housing provider is looking at where they're going to allocate the funds, there's certain things they need to consider. They've got to consider that they've got to protect the tenants and provide them with a reasonable and safe living environment. And risk associated with that. So there's like a long list of 29 different risks. What we need to think about: cold homes, warm, too hot homes. There's a lot of people die from being too hot in the homes. What I don't think people are aware of as well. A lot more than I ever thought of as well, to be honest. So that's a risk. Basically, being exposed to being too hot in your home for too long.
Wow. I never even given that any thought.
No.
When we do our safe and well visits and our welfare visits, it's always one of the questions we ask is, do you struggle to heat your home? We never ask anybody if they're particularly too hot in their home, I suppose. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've had heat alarms are set to trigger at 58 degrees C, which is very hot. Yeah. It's got to be hot because you want to reduce the chances of anything else in the kitchen setting off an alarm. So you fit a heat alarm in the kitchen, but it's 58 degrees C. Unless you've got it right over the cooker in the wrong place, and you're actually generating that heat on a hob, and it's going straight up into it, which you should never have it directly above a cooker anyway. You should never have a nuisance alarm from heat alarms. And when we do get calls from people saying, I think the heat alarm's too close to the cooker because it's going off every time I'm cooking, it tends to be because it's linked to an ionisation alarm somewhere else in the property, and they're just assuming it's the one above the red what's triggering. Okay. But we did have one case where, a heat alarm were going off in an old woman's kitchen. She got a lean-to conservatory on the back of the kitchen, and it was basically magnifying the heat from the way the roof was set up. It was magnifying the heat from the sun, and it was basically getting up
cooking hot, aren't they? Absolutely ridiculous. Some of them.
But it's like she was living in a property. She was in this kitchen cooking when it were above 65 degrees. Ambient temperature. It was amazing that she was actually still alive. Actually, how hot you get if you're stood outside and you're in temperatures of 35 degrees. It's unbearable. She were in a kitchen where it was 65 degrees. I mean, just don't know how
from a level of heat exhaustion, heat stress, becoming dehydrated, withered, or losing all your natural nutrients, salts, minerals. You just become very, very weak. Very quickly. Yeah,
that's it. So there's all these risks, local authorities have to think about, and then basically associate budgets to, along with everything else they need to do, because obviously there's tenant satisfaction. Tenants need to be happy. They need to feel secure in the home. Having a front door what actually locks, and windows that actually keep the heat in. There's many things and there's many pressures. Well, we understand that, but if a fire occurs in a property, their insurance costs go up. It's not just about the person in the property, it's that all the damage was done to that property as well.
We do cause a lot of damage. We make a lot of damage with water more than anything else, to be fair.
Absolutely. So you can immediately see there's a cost benefit in basically. If we've got smoke alarms in their water, we're going to prevent any significant spread of fire because, how many times are we aware of fires what may have started in properties, what never get reported? People will set the tea towel on fire by leaving it on top of the hob or something, and the alarms will go off, they'll put it out, nobody will be none the wiser. So I think, having smoke alarms in there prevents a lot of potential costs associated with it. So they can justify it straight away. Having enough smoke alarms in there prevents that fire. Yeah, we're keeping the tenants safe, but we're also protecting our investment in terms of properties. What is the cost of the economy of a fire death? What is the cost of the economy for a CO death? I mean, I saw a presentation from Colby about 5-6 years ago, basically said the cost to the economy of a carbon monoxide poisoning one person is about £1 million.
Really?
For smoke nowadays, when you take into account the sort of investigation costs, what that person may well have earned in their lives, what the impact on their family, the impact on the NHS, everything added together, there's a lot of hidden costs when with these things. We've just done we've just commissioned a sort of research group on fire, specifically on fire. And some of the statistics, I mean, the number's gone from like 1 million now to something like £2.2 million for someone who's actually died in a fire. For every sort of fire incident where someone dies, the cost of rehousing people, and putting them, in a property until their house is right. There's many hidden costs. There's so much more impact on people as well. We're completely a sort of anonymous survey. We went out to thousands of people, asking them if they'd ever experienced a fire in their lifetime. And then subsequent questions about what type of property they live in, what type of tenure it is, if it's rented or owner-occupied, and also questions about, if you had to make an insurance claim, how much time did it take you to actually deal with that insurance claim? Did you get paid out in full, what you expected to get paid out based upon what you lost? And also the mental act as well, what happened to them mentally after the fire. And I'd never really thought of it enough until you start. I mean, they're all anonymous comments, basically, from people saying, if you were affected by this fire, how were you affected? And, are you still thinking about, what are you thinking about? And there's people saying, I had a fire in my house when I was 7 years old, and I'm in my 40s now, and I'm still scared. Still, check everything on a nightly basis because of that fire what happened 30 odd years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's affecting their whole life, The idea that, we've got people in properties still with no smoke alarms, what we could be looking at 40 years' time, what they're suffering from something what could be entirely preventable by having the right number of smoke alarms in their house.
Where does the legislation and the jurisdiction lie, and what's the road ahead looking like to getting to that point where we've got 100% safety?
It's huge. I mean, and it's a huge undertaking as well when you start looking at responsibilities and what the legislation's actually out there. I mean, basically, the devolved nations are very different for a start. We don't have UK-wide. We've got a British standard. There's a British standard out there, which is basically prescriptive guidance for anyone working, or looking at using domestic fire detection in a property. There's a British standard what people, can refer to and should follow. Basically, it gives them all the guidance they need on what is appropriate in what type of property as a minimum level. Now, we've used this for years. I mean, since 2004, where it really became sort of well used within the industry, I suppose. And it tends to change every sort of 5 years or so. The last iteration was 2019. And it basically, you can look down the list and it will say, right, it's 2-story property, it's rental accommodation, this is what you should fit in that property. And generally speaking, in most cases now, in all rental properties, the recommendation will be all escape routes, so hallways and landings, the principal living room, and the kitchen. So basically the kitchen, because obviously most fires start in kitchens. Mm-hmm. The escape routes, because ideally, if fire does start and spread into those areas, you've got to get out. The unfortunate thing is, in most people's perception, is we must cover the escape routes. That's it. That's people's perception. And yet, less than 1% of fires start in the escape routes. They're always starting in another room and eventually spreading to the escape routes. So you're going to have a fairly well set fire by the time, potentially, if you do what the fire and rescue service tell you to do and shoot your doors every night, you've got a compartmentalised room almost for a period of time for a fire to start until it spreads and gets big enough to spread through to the escape routes. So, unfortunately, you probably have a pretty well set fire by the time the smoke alarms go off if you've only got to be escape routes. So most fires start in kitchens. In most cases, people are up and around, so they become aware of that fire fairly quickly and they get out. It's like I think it's less than 15% of actual deaths in properties are where the fire is actually originated in the kitchen. Okay. So I'm guessing it'll be the guy, the people who fall asleep with chip pans on and stuff like that. They don't wake up, and effectively that's where the problem lies. Over 40% of deaths in fires are where the fire's generated in the living room, originates in the living room. So it's a huge proportion responsible for a huge proportion of deaths in property where the fire starts there. So it makes sense that should be the place where you have the smoke alarm. If you get early warning. And guess, there's various reasons for that. I'm sure, the reasons why this happens. You've got the soft furnishings in the room, they may generate a lot more sort of poisonous gases, what kill people quicker. And also, the geography of where it is in the property. It's probably near, the last room before the front door, the living room. So if the fire starts there and gets to a point where it eventually spreads through the doorway, it's probably compromising your escape route fairly quickly.
Yeah.
If you get an early warning for it, you'll know about the fire. You can get out before it actually gets too bad. So there's plenty of reasons for why it should be there. And like I said, the standard sort of points you that way. So that's the British guidance, and that's the standard it gives you. We've got building regulations. So if anybody builds a new house, they're required to fit smoke alarms. So you won't get any builders basically building a new house where it'll get signed off without some detection. The unfortunate thing is that basically provides a minimum standard, which is escape routes. You've got installers who are actually installing the smoke alarms, who are working effectively to the British standards. That if they're working if they're part of any competency scheme like NIC or ECA or Select Up in Scotland, they're expected to work to the standards. So if they want to sign a certificate based upon the work that they're doing, it has to be to the appropriate standards. So they'll effectively go into a property for a new build company who's saying, right, the minimum standards of the building regs is to fit 2 detectors. And there's a contractor working to the standards, which is to fit 4 detectors. So they do it a bit of an issue sometimes where the contractor is basically out of pocket because he's working to the standards, but the builder's saying, well, I only need to fit 2 detectors to get it signed off. So we keep talking about this disparity and sorting this out. But in terms of the British standards, it's prescriptive.
Okay.
This is, as a professional working within the industry, you're expected to follow the standards, and you're putting yourself in a tenuous position if you're not working to the standards. It's like an electrician trying to do something against the 7671 standards. He's going to end up if there's ever a problem, he's going to fall. He's the one responsible for it. And it's the same with fire detection. If you're responsible for properties and you're putting tenants into those properties, you need to provide them with reasonable protection and, make an informed decision as to what to do. Unfortunately, the private landlords legislation came out in 2018, which were effectively to force private landlords to put fire detection in properties. However, they set a very, very low bar in terms of what to fit. Basically, all they said were you need to fit a smoke alarm per floor in a property. But the point is, you've got something on your ceiling what's protecting your life for the next 10 years.
Yeah. So
effectively, the Scottish Government has said to everyone, regardless of tenure, so landlords, social landlords, and owner-occupiers, you've got to have a minimum standard of smoke detection in your property by February, as was February 2020.
Okay.
So basically, they put a law in place. I don't think it was necessarily sort of advertised enough. So we as a responsible company, but also as a commercial entity, basically took it upon ourselves to make sure that people in Scotland knew that they needed to have a smoke alarm in their property by the end of 2020. At which point, various people in government realised, that it had not necessarily been promoted as widely as it should have been.
Yeah.
And people in the community were also saying, we didn't know about this, and we're in COVID. We're basically in midst pandemic now, and we need to try and get this sorted out. And it was just impossible. Too many people in the country needed to sort this out. So they effectively just extended the legislation, which is something which is never done. The idea is we pass a law, it's in, once that law's been passed, it's enshrined, and it's a nightmare to try and change it. But they effectively extended the period until 2020, we're 2021. I said 2020, 2021, and they've extended it to this year, to 2022, basically. So by the end of February 2022, everybody in Scotland effectively should have working smoke alarms in their escape routes, in the living room, and in the kitchen, and interconnected. That's the key part, that they've got to be interconnected. So it's not a case of ringing your fire service up and saying, can you come in and fit a couple of battery smoke alarms so I meet the legislation? They've got to be interconnected. It has been a massive undertaking, but we've already seen it. you look at the statistics what are out there now, and the fatalities in Scotland from fire deaths are dropping. There's still reported fires are still there, but you're seeing this drop in fatalities, and all you can think is, well, so people are still starting fires. People are still probably buying the cheap chargers and what causing fires, and they're still doing the same things they've always done, which is creating fires in the properties for various reasons. But they're becoming aware of it now, and they're getting out. So the fatalities are dropping. The fire statistics are still fairly high, but the fatalities are dropping. And that,
I think that's where our focus needs to be, because also I think people are more distracted than they ever have been now. We could argue we're better educated, and we could argue we've got much better access to resources. Most people have access to a digital device of some form. Their mobile phone usually gives them access to all the information that they're ever going to need. But it also brings with it a hell of a lot of distraction. So we're almost, whilst we're stepping forward and making a lot of gains and progress with safer communities and trying to empower people with the knowledge, we're also burning into or they're running out of that attention. People say time and stuff is a finite, and it is, but more than anything else, it's their attention, trying to hold and engage people. And when you find that exhibiting itself in the home, it's a distraction with television, with mobile devices, and that is where a lot of this occurs. It's not because people are stupid. It's not because people don't care. It's not because they're maliciously trying to hurt themselves or others. It's often just because they're distracted.
You see in the streets, literally everybody's looking at the phone now in the streets. It's constant. So I'm surprised road traffic accidents with pedestrians haven't risen as much as it has done, to be honest, because it's that distraction. And I think we've seen the fires, but we've seen a drop off. And I just think, if we saw the same drop off in England, how many more people wouldn't be dying in fires? But when you're having conversations with people, with installers about stuff, I'm quite happy to talk about what the fire rescue service are doing. But one of the key things, I think, one of the really good things about the home fire safety checks is escape. Not enough people. They fit in smoke alarms, but they're not thinking about how they're actually going to get out of the property if there is a fire. It's a massive thing. I mean, I look at my house. I looked at my house at the time, and when it first became apparent to me about this, and I've not really thought about it myself. No. And basically, we've got window locks. Everybody's got locking windows now. If they've got fairly, modern, I'd say in the last 20 years, modern, I suppose, most people have got locks on windows. But do they actually know where the key is for those windows? And we didn't. I basically looked around the house and thought, how am I going to get out the kids' bedroom window if that's what happens? Because generally speaking, you probably get your family together and go to the kids' bedroom and then get out from there. Making sure that everyone's safe before you start looking for your escape. And didn't know what we've locked the kids' window because it's safe to do that. Yeah. But then we don't know where the key is to open it, and it's double glazed. It's probably going to take a hell of a hit to try and smash it.
Oh God, yeah.
So basically, where's the key? And the wife said, "Oh yeah, it's in the pot downstairs. I've got them all in the little pot downstairs." It's like, well, good for that if there's ever a fire. And I think how many more people must be in that situation where they've no idea how they're going to open. Well, they probably do know how they're going to open the windows, but they've got the key in a place what's not going to be accessible in the event of a fire. And people need, should think about this, and also consider the fact that the kids won't wake up from smoke alarms. No. I'm on the fence as regards whether or not they should wake up from smoke alarms, because I think in all cases they should be responsible adults in the house anyway. And the idea of a 3-year-old waking up from a smoke alarm and then going running off around the house, when ideally you want to know that they're in bed and you can get to them. As soon as the alarms go off, you go there and they're going to be in bed where you expect them to be, to help them get them out of the house. So I'm not entirely convinced that we need to have something what ensures that kids do wake up in fires. But people should be aware that there is a chance that their children won't wake up. The work what Dave Cross did down in Derby, looking into it after the Philpott case. A large proportion of children, when he asked his colleagues to go home, he basically asked his colleagues to go home at night and set off a smoke alarm directly above the kids' bed at 3 a.m. He didn't get the best response from his colleagues initially when he asked them to do this, because they all said, "There's no way I'm waking up my 5-year-old at 3 o'clock in the morning." Yeah. So he basically ended up having bets with them, giving them some money and saying, "Look, if if they do wake up, keep the money. If not, bring the money back to me tomorrow. And the majority of them, I think 9 out of 10 of them, came back and gave him the money.
Really?
There were some interesting insights from some of the work they did. One were that more kids did wake up who had got younger siblings. So it's not about the actual physical ability to hear a smoke alarm.
No, it's not.
It's
whether it triggers you, because you become, it's a little bit like people that live next to a train line, or, I mean, even when we're out on the roads now, people have become, it's like white noise. People have become, they don't respond to sirens, they don't respond to alarms in the same way that they used to, and car alarms and house alarms are just going off, and it's just white noise. People don't respond to it. We can pull right up behind people with our two tones on and flashing blue lights, and they don't even know we're there.
It's interesting you said that, actually. I was thinking that the other day about the ambulances, the fact that there's been so many ambulances, every day I'll see an ambulance with blue lights on. Yeah. Not thought about it in that way, but it's probably true. But
isn't there some companies that have a voice on some of their alarms? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's various ways.
But that's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to go, and I think then you've got to start thinking about all the people who've got English as a second language, and they've not so many implications with doing something like that you could end up making 30 different versions of it, which I just, we know there's a tried and proven way of waking up adults in a fire. Things other than that, I mean, I just wonder whether or not if someone were talking, if I got a smoke alarm, what told, knowing how loud my son has his TV, whether or not I'd even differentiate between the sound of somebody talking on the smoke alarm and TV, his TV basically blaring away. So I think there's always some issues around various, looking at it various ways. I mean, some woman actually mentioned about, why don't you just have a smoke alarm what sends a text message to a child? Because basically the phone buzzing will wake them up in the middle of the night. They're up all night looking at Instagram and various other.
That is an unfortunate truth. Perhaps there's some validity to some of that.
Yeah, it's horrendous. But basically, there's still research happening. It's ongoing research. And like I say, I'm a little bit on the fence as to whether they need to be woken up in a fire anyway, if I'm honest. Because I like the idea. I would definitely have preferred the idea of having my kids in their beds where I expected them to be.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think everybody's going to have an opinion on this. But the main thing is understanding that's what could happen in a fire. If you know that's not, the kids might not wake up in a fire, then put a smoke alarm in the bedroom. If a fire does start in their bedroom, you're going to know about it a lot quicker than waiting for it to spread through to the upstairs landing and trigger the alarms. I think, as soon as I started working for Aico and saw some of the videos, you get to see from clients, and they show you houses, they show you bedrooms where basically just a laptop left on a bed, so completely burnt out of the bedroom.
Yeah.
It's just overheated. It's literally, you've got a fan on the side of a laptop, what dissipates heat. Yeah. As soon as it goes onto a duvet, it's basically stopping that fan. Yeah. It's so, all these little things you sort of mention when you're doing training to people, like, have you thought about an escape route? Have you, if you've got kids, have you got laptops?
We find that a lot with students as well. We find it with students that work in, obviously work in their bedrooms. They have small student accommodation, and they're doing work while they're in bed, and they're away on the laptop and stuff like that. The amount of heat that gets built up around that, and you see it, the quick near misses when they've got scorch marks on the duvets and stuff like that. And luckily, there's been detection in the corridor, or perhaps even they've taken it up on themselves to put it in their own flats. But it's common.
Yeah, but it's getting that knowledge out to people, like to the parents, basically. Just have a chat with your kids and basically say, look, whatever you do, don't leave your laptop open on your bed unattended, because this is what happens. Did you even know? That's half the time. They don't even know this is even a risk. They're just doing it. If you have that conversation, you're putting it in the mind. And the same with kids waking up from smoke alarms is like, it may not happen. If you know about it, you know what you're going to do in the event of a fire. And always have an escape plan, and make sure you have that conversation with your kids. This is what's going to happen. If these alarms going off and we have a fire in the house, this is what we're going to do.
Paul, that has been so insightful, my man, especially from the legislative perspective and stuff like that. Empowering, you spoke about empowerment there, empowering people with the knowledge of what they're exposed to, where they should be getting that help from, what responsibility lies from within people in and around them already, landlords, people building housing, but how they can also take those actions themselves, those small nuggets. And that's all you ever want. It's just that little takeaway.
But no, thanks for today. Appreciate it, mate. Good to talk to you again.
Good to speak to you. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you soon.
See you later, mate.
Bye-bye.